All right, everyone, we are back. Another episode of the Intelligent Edge podcast. We have an amazing guest right today. He is going to talk to us about something legitimately out of this world. I'm joined with my very handsome, very astute colleague, Nick Good. How you doing, Nick?
Man, I love your intros, Matt. I could just be on these all the time. If you're having a bad day, just let Matt do an intro, and you'll feel better about yourself. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man. You know, you got to let the confidence and the goodwill fly.
Love
No
it.
better way to start a show or a day with something nice to say about somebody else.
That's right.
Awesome. So we're here today. Super cool guest. Lots of great stuff. I'm really looking forward to this one. So Steve Eisele, who is the uh, CEO and president,
Yeah,
or Chief Revenue
CEO
Officer.
actually now. Just you can drop the president title.
Love it. Chief Executive Officer of Lone Star Holdings or Lone Star Data, depending on where you find him on the internet. Steve, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
All right, it's great to be here with you guys. Both, excited to talk about this topic. Not many people have worked in the industry that I have and kind of combined, all the latest in technology with space, and so pretty excited to share a little bit what we're up to.
Nice. We're excited to have you. And as we were preparing for the show, we came up with a summary for you that you are a career space industry deal maker who now leads a company trying to build the world's first off-planet cloud and DR data center on the moon. Is that accurate?
That it's mostly accurate, At least you didn't come up with Moon Mortician because I helped put ashes on the moon once, and the little crayon said Moon Mortician underneath it, I think. And I was like, where what the hell did that come from? It's like, give me a break. It is definitely accurate. So I'm a co-founder of a company called Lone Star Data Holdings, and the ultimate objective is to put our data storage off planet. Just with all the challenges from the bad actors, the hackers, the natural disasters, the energy consumption that's required on Earth. The next logical step is in space. The ultimate goal is on the moon, but in the near future, in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, we're going to be focused on multi orbits between the Earth and the moon.
Amazing. So we definitely want to talk about what you're doing with Lone Star. Before we get there, though, like you've had an incredible career.
Thank you.
So maybe you can talk about, Steve prior to Lone Star, and then we can pick up the timeline there.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had a varied career and really, really blessed and, really, really glad I had, good support from my family and friends and everybody else who kind of got you through that. But I grew up in Texas and then I went to school on the East Coast at Johns Hopkins, did my grad there. And I worked, I was one of like maybe 30 of us who specialized in what they called strategic studies at the time. And that was really focused on like military strategy and how that applies to, obviously real world examples and how economics and military strategy kind of come together in a sense. And so I worked briefly for a bunch of defense contractors. And through that engagement, I was like, I don't love defense. But we were looking at a bunch of projects relating to missile technology, and of course, missile technology is dual use for rocket technology, and rocket technology really is about pushing the edge of the future, pioneering humanity, and missile technology is maybe setting us back a little bit, depending on how you look at it. So, knocking us into the Stone Age. So I said, man, I like the missile side where we leave the planet, and we're looking at ways to actually advance the human condition in a positive way. So I then left that field and I worked in my first space company. And I was actually doing a space tourism company, and we were attempting to refurbish and relaunch a bunch of old Russian military hardware called the Almaz space program. It was space capsules and space stations that had flown in the 70s and 80s, some of them by the Russians. And this was when U.S. and Russia was on slightly better terms than today. But we had an international group that was actively looking to take that program before Elon. I mean, this was right around the same time as Elon. So we kind of fashioned ourselves as like ahead of him when it came to like space capsules and things. We're like, oh yeah, we're going to beat Elon. It's a lot harder than it looks. Even though we had all the hardware, we had all this crazy technology, and the financial crisis of 2008 came around, and our billionaire became a millionaire who was backing us. And that was, all she wrote on that mission. Beyond that, then I also worked, and this is relevant to today. I was a executive at the XPrize Foundation, helping with the Google and her XPrize. And the XPrize Foundation, for anyone who's never heard of it, it's an amazing organization. I suggest you check it out at xprize.org. They have been responsible for putting prizes out there, which really set the stage for a lot of like crazy innovations, like the first space tourism vehicle that Virgin Galactic ended up buying from Scale Composites that flew into suborbital space. They have done these amazing prizes in the maritime domain for cancer drugs and cures. And the prize I was focused on was the first commercial lunar lander to go to the moon. And so it was a $20 million Google prize that was put up to really kind of promote and push industry to get creative and figure out a way for cheap, obviously through commercial means, to land on the moon. And that was something that there was maybe 12 teams or so that competed from all over the world. They were from India, from Japan, from Israel, from the US, Europe. And none of the teams could quite get there. They were starting, they were making these cool tests and everything else. And, this was still a little bit the Wild West. So, there's been a few Wild West moments in space. The 90s, certainly, when the billionaires were like, Apollo, we never got back to the moon, let's go. Let's start putting our money in. That's when Elon and Richard Branson from Virgin and others were like, and Bezos started even Blue Origin. We're like, we got to go back. And then this prize was kind of like supporting this, big, titan of industry vision, which is like, all right, now we got to get commercial going. And so it didn't happen. And that was 2010, 2011 timeframe. And I say it didn't happen because actually today, the legacy of that has completely now come full circle. And it is happening. It's happening today, which is kind of where I've gotten to now. And that, we've now had multiple landers either go to the moon. Not all landed successfully, but a few did. And many of those came out of this X Prize. So it just shows you sometimes when a seed is, planted, it might take a few years to grow and get us to that point. So not always, and I kind of thought like, maybe maybe nothing's going to happen from that. And then, fast forward 10 years and it's like, the first one was heading towards the moon. That was Israelis, the next one and the next one. So that's really cool to see today of, how, preparation is sometimes, don't be dissuaded when things don't come out right away. You may be pioneering a brand new road for future businesses and companies. And then the second part of my career, most recently, I was involved in building satellites, launching them for a company based out of the UK and the US called Surrey Satellite. And they were a pioneer for what's called small satellites. So one of the first companies to like privately put together small satellites. And to your viewers and listeners, that may not sound like a big deal, but the reality is before, let's say the 2000s, for the most part, most aerospace builds, whether they were rockets or satellites, were done with big government funding, typically under government contracting, even though the contractors, might have been commercial, like a Lockheed Martin, a Boeing, a Raytheon. They were still very much in a structure that I would say was still legacy government. And what we saw from the 2000s forward was this real push for commercial innovation, thinking outside the box, breaking barriers. And to do that, you really had to have, you need cowboys. You need cowboys to go in there and say, screw this. It's not how we've always, it's how we've always done it. It's too expensive. It's too slow. How do we push the envelope? How do we push the risk curve? And that's what Elon did, and that's what so many entrepreneurs today are doing in this arena. There's so many startup space companies. I knew a 16-year-old who built a satellite actually and had it launched. I mean, you can actually take this technology and build it in your backyard. Practically, I mean, they've got kits where you can build satellites. They're called CubeSats, and you can build them in your garage, and you can put little sensors. They may not do a lot of big things, but it's always one closer step to your understanding and to a person's understanding on how like this industry works. So we built bigger satellites, and we launched them into space, and that was cool. And then about 6 years ago, I joined Virgin Orbit, which was a sister company to Virgin Galactic. And Virgin Orbit was charged with building rockets under the Virgin banner as a complement to Virgin Galactic, which did suborbital tourism and was pushing more human spaceflight. And so on the launch sites, I worked with launch vehicle providers. We built rockets from scratch. We launched them off planes. We really were looking to revolutionize a little bit access to space. So, not to get into too many details, but every rocket, the big rockets, they tend to kind of go to one spot, one orbit, and they drop all the satellites off. But the little rockets are interesting because they can take smaller payloads. So maybe they'll take a single satellite or maybe just a few satellites, and they'll launch them to a specific orbit. They may go equatorial. They may go to a different inclination to provide different coverage and access. So the analog I like to give is kind of like the small rockets are like the Uber. You order it, you tell exactly where to go, it drops you off at your front door. And the big rockets are more like the bus. Everyone kind of buys a ticket, you all kind of pile in, and it drops you off at the bus station. But that's been a bit of the framework of where I've been. And then I joined Lone Star, where we are today. Trying to provide that next revolution of space and tech, and it very much is fueled by AI. And at Lone Star, I know we'll get into it more, but it's looking at doing data storage in space. So we're leveraging the majesty of space for a lot of different things.
So Steve, that's a lot, and I'm going to go back and rewatch that because that's some of that. I'm like, holy smokes! I think you just gave us a college professor lesson there. But what Lone Star is solving is it data protection? Is it securing having secure data? Is that the main vision and goal?
Right, Nick. Yeah, the baseline is basically secure storage. So it's almost like bank vaults in space. I like to think of it like this is the Fort Knox. You currently have, you've got your data centers, you've got your cloud providers, you've got, your own cold disk where you may store and back up your data. And the challenge is right now, there's just an example, I think today, of where you've got AI generated hacks and all these attacks that are targeting specific types of data, whether it's for, getting your financial data or getting government military data. Obviously there's threats all the time. We're constantly being bombarded, and terrestrially everything is linked, right? I mean, whether you're in the cloud, you've got Wi-Fi connections, you've got the cable fiber running under the seabed, through every home, and there's a lot of ways to disrupt the data, and you can cut it. I mean, literally there are Chinese trawlers in the Baltic that are like tearing up the cables. You can jam Wi-Fi signals or hack them. You could physically launch a missile at a data center, which happened in the Middle East, the engagement between Palestine and Israel. You saw that happening as a strategic way to knock out infrastructure. Same thing with the Russians and Ukrainians. So it's become a very strategic pinpoint place, basically, because there's so much value there, where it's like, oh yeah, bam, if I knock this out, and depending on where you are, it could impact energy, it could impact hospitals, because you don't get all the clean data, you don't know what the data is anymore, like, oh, what blood type are you, this or that, in a time of war. Obviously it can disrupt the banking systems. So we're focused primarily on data security and storage, and we're doing that by putting up assets in space. And I'm happy to get into that on how we secure that. But that's the premise.
Let's maybe go a little bit deeper on this, and because I don't think, and if our listeners and viewers go to a previous episode, Michael Schumacher, he shared with us, he's in data security, and he said, number one, that the United States, it's scary how far we are behind when it comes to securing our data and our technology. He's like, he didn't really want to touch it that much, but he said Israel is one of the most secure, and even then that has a little bit of flaws. So kind of walk us through, number one, why, you're shooting for the stars in essence, taking this into space. Is that the first step in having the most secure data, or kind of walk us through, how this evolved, and is that really the best step, or the first right step?
Well, I think there's levels, right? And it depends on the data you're protecting. It depends on the entity. Is this government? Is this military? Is it retail? I mean, we may put less premium on protecting our cat photos and more premium on protecting the nuclear codes, for example, right? So you do kind of have to look at it in terms of tiers. The next thing is, I would say, just generally, not talking about space or ground, is just the threat environment to data. Well, actually, even a step back, what's driving like the need for data centers? I mean, I've been now talking about data centers and space and how that can help for about 2 years, since that's when I joined the company. In 2 years ago, people were like, I don't get it. Why would we do that? Things seem fine here, this and that. We have enough, space to do data centers. Well, obviously, in the last I would say year, we've really seen an amazing uptick in data generation, obviously by the AI revolution. And so what is even the problem? The problem is, like, there's so much new data being generated, and you have to store that, right? The cloud isn't actually a fluffy cloud. I've been to the cloud. You guys may have been to the cloud. It's a bunch of racks and cages, and that takes physical space and physical energy. And AI is literally, quintillions of bytes of data more are generated per day than the previous day. So you're on this crazy exponential curve of new data being generated. And then think about and this is like maybe even a 20-year phenomenon where things are digital, like actually digital. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw, like, not too long ago, they were talking about, I think it's Iron Mountain was the company, and they went into like a coal mine, and they found all these paper copies of people's like healthcare records. And yeah, it was like this weird thing where, like, oh wait, we bury this in a mine, kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, we where do you put these paper copies? Where do you think the hospitals have these records? They've got basements, or they've got, something. But then floods, like in Houston where I grew up, there was massive floods, and all that stuff got wiped out. So on top of more, quintillions of bytes of data more being generated, you are now digitizing everything, right? I mean, I think 20 years ago, it's safe to say not everything was digitized. We still printed stuff out. We filed them in our folders. That's like, kids in the next generation aren't even going to know what a copy machine was anymore. So I think all that was, those are the big drivers, right? And so now you have to address the issue, which is, where do you store all that data? And then the byproduct of that is, how do you generate enough energy for that? Because we're talking gigawatt multiplexes of power required to support data, like large data centers. And just for reference, a gigawatt, that can power like the city of Denver. So if you're now taking away power from power grids because we're just trying to store data, that's all we're doing. We're basically just storing the data somewhere. Like, how do we meet those challenges? And obviously a lot of people are fighting that. So that's kind of why we're starting to think about these things. And then the second layer, of course, is the threats. So this is now where it gets like super interesting. We alluded to earlier, like Palestine, Israel. One of the first things that was done were, missiles were lobbed at data centers specifically, which took out some vital knowledge of infrastructure in Israel. We've seen, AI hacks. So in fact, they just announced, I think it was today, Anthropic announced that there was an AI-driven hacking campaign that was done automated. So AI came up with the source code, I think through Claude or something, and like started attacking government, facilities or companies. Then you have the way that you can physically actually disrupt cables, like I mentioned, the underwater cables or any terrestrial kind of cables. And then you got to think about, like, there's like countries like Estonia, they border Russia. So if they were ever invaded, which could happen, and they've been invaded in the past, then all their stuff could get into Russian hands, right? And they're a NATO country. Or you have a small country and you want to back up your data somewhere. You don't want to put it all in the same place because that's a vulnerable target. And where do you put it? Where do you get all the power? Where do you build the physical data center? So these questions are what kind of drive then kind of where we are today is, well, space is certainly an answer. And happy to break that down next, but I'll pause for a second to see if you guys have any other thoughts.
No, so, Steve, like at its core, right? You mentioned before that you're not going to put cat photos into your, orbital's data
Maybe
center.
not to begin. Yeah.
Okay. So you're probably talking about very sensitive, very privileged data. I'm assuming that you're transmitting via satellite internet connection, a Starlink, or something along those lines, right? Because traditional
Even safer.
TCP/IP.
Even safer. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll tell you. Yeah. Go. But yeah, finish your thought.
So, and then are you storing it on like EMC storage and stuff like that, or have you come up with some sort of proprietary hardware as well?
Combination. So, okay. So the premise is basically now the first premise correct by Matt. We're not going to store everything. So, I mean, you need exobytes and yottabytes of data storage. You're not going to do that overnight in space. So this is a gradual progression, let's say, although it'll pick up pretty quickly in the coming years. And so the first thing I'll say is what we're looking to protect and store is what we classify as critical data. So critical data is essentially data that you need for resiliency purposes, continuity of operations, to use like a more military term. So if you're a government and you're looking for your infrastructure and your, the basics that you require to function as a country, that's the kind of data that we're looking to back up and store. So that does include government, civil government, military government, proprietary, and classified. That can include, usually it's like healthcare, banking, financial data. Sometimes it's things like taxable data, social security numbers, things of that nature. Maybe if you're a company, maybe if you're Coke, you put the secret recipe of Coke up there, or your basic infrastructure kind of requirements, your password keys, your managed encryption keys, that sort of thing. Because what we're doing is the very first layer of our approach is we're going to be putting hundreds of petabytes of data storage in space. So hundreds of petabytes, if that doesn't mean anything to anyone, it's a lot of data storage, but it's not enough to get everything up there. But certainly for countries, it's enough to get like that top 5% data backup in space. So think of it more like racks in space, storage systems. We use SSD cards that have been space hardened, so they've been basically tested against the radiation environment in space. I will say there's just a lot of knowledge out there with satellites and just putting things up in space to where honestly it's not really a challenge for us to maintain that environment. The threats are incredibly minimal to that, and there's mitigation. There's shielding. If a solar flare were to come into an area, you can power down a satellite until it passes. So there's a lot we've learned in space that really don't make this that scary of a proposition at all. I mean, heck, you have Starlink providing Wi-Fi from space, and no one probably 10 years ago thought, why do I need Wi-Fi from space? But you see the impact. And then the last thing I'll just add, Matt and Nick, is just how it actually then works. So you mentioned how do we transfer the data? So this is also critical. So for critical data, for data that is absolutely critical for resiliency, continuity of operations, and then for high value assets, as I mentioned, we are looking to secure it through an independent network that's completely air gapped. So what we've done is we've partnered with data centers around the world, including in the US, the UK, Latin America, Australia, New Zealand, and announcing more and more places. Each of these data centers for this critical data, they have basically like a satellite dish, like a ground station inside the secured lines of the data center. And then there's a special rack in the data center that contains that's the transfer vessel, I guess, or node that you to bring it from ground to satellite. And when it's in off mode, it's fully air gapped. So it's almost like having a thumb drive that it's just completely detached from terrestrial networks. Like I said, so the Chinese aren't ripping up your cables. They can't really, it's very difficult to jam, disrupt, and to access. And then only when you want to uplink and refresh the data or downlink to retrieve the data, a connection is made. So there's a special radio frequency that you get assigned, and we have a very special one, which is encrypted, and then the data received is also encrypted. So it's basically like taking a thumb drive of your most precious data and burying it under, Yucca Mountain somewhere. Except the problem with burying it under Yucca Mountain, that's secure. However, it may not be accessible depending on the threat environment, or you may not have the right people to go get it, and then you have to physically retrieve it. So we're offering a solution that is accessible nearly 24/7, and I'll explain later how that works. And it's more secure, so it's like a cloud above the clouds. We have different security levels. So we have a security level that's more secure than most ground data centers, but more accessible. And then we have one that's much further away, which is what Matt alluded to in his intro, which is out by the moon in cislunar space. And that is designed to be a true like vault in space, like a Fort Knox in space for data, or a bank for your data, that you only need to access, you don't access that every day. You make an appointment and then you get the data down. But it bypasses nearly every terrestrial threat, any natural disaster. I mean, in Florida, when there's hurricanes, the data centers sometimes shut down. You can't access data. When there's a hack, especially these AI program hacks, not only are they attacking the primary source of data or your data back, they're looking for the backups as well, and they're infiltrating those. So we've had government clients in particular tell us we don't even trust our backups sometimes, because we just don't know, we think that the sophisticated nature of this hack we have reason to believe they've accessed our backup. So then again, that's where you may come to Lone Star as a primary backup. But the big goal is really to offer multi-orbit. So we'll be in low Earth orbit, kind of the same place where the Starlink satellites are. That gets you the faster access to the data. We'll be in cislunar space. So if you've got the Earth and you've got the moon, we're going to be about 2/3 of the way towards the moon. We don't orbit the moon. We actually are in a really specialized orbit called L1. I won't get into physics, but it's an equilibrium orbit to where the satellites kind of orbit on itself, and they always stay in front of the moon. Why is that good? Because number one, you don't get the distortion from going around the moon, right? Because you can't communicate when you're behind the moon. So you're always communicating. It's always pointing at the Earth, which allows you to constantly be uploading or downloading data as required. It just could take a little bit longer, and you may or may not be able to download as much. But again, we're talking critical data, that you can send and file in small packets and prioritize depending on how you want. And then the big picture, which is what the Titans are talking about, Elon, Bezos, Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, they're talking about data centers in space that could also go off-planetary, which we were one of the first to talk about, which is actually put them on the moon. And you would do yottabyte data-sized data centers, like massive. You have unlimited power up on the moon, solar at least. The challenge of the moon is the cooling. It gets too cold. You have something called the lunar night, which lasts 2 weeks. So nuclear batteries or shielded data centers that you put in in craters and things would support that. And it sounds like science fiction, but I mean, whoever thought Starship, could, bullseye in the middle of the ocean. So that's the same. Why is Elon doing that? Because he wants to land on the moon. He wants to land on Mars. Okay, and if you have a big ass rocket like that can land on the moon or on Mars, you can also take a lot of hardware with you, and you can, and then now he has robots too. So you got the robots that can assemble everything. So I think that's 10 years plus away, but 10 years isn't that far, and everything else is going to happen in the next year.
So Steve, let me ask you then. I mean, that sounds amazing. So if let's say I'm a company that is looking to store data, read about you, I hear about you, maybe I saw this podcast. What as Lone Star, what is y'all's challenges? Why would not everyone just run and say, I want in on this?
Yeah, I mean, first off, there's going to be an infrastructure building phase. So we've done 4 missions. They were test missions. So we did 2 to the International Space Station to test out software, and then we actually landed twice on the moon with a company called Intuitive Machines, where we had a software payload. On the second one, we actually had a hardware payload, which was like a mini data storage system device that was then put on the moon. And we didn't need to be on the moon. Our whole mission actually was meant to test in cislunar, which is that area I was describing, kind of closer to the moon and the L1 orbit. And so we did 100% of our tests actually en route to the moon. When it landed, that was bonus to get extra access. Unfortunately, it tipped over. We had a little bit of we were able to see it and talk a little bit, but those are the challenges of space. It's like you tip over when you land on the moon. So it didn't impact us in a bad way, and in fact, we were able to do everything that we needed to do. And then after that, we're putting up our first satellite next year in low Earth orbit, which is the orbit that's roughly up to 2,000 kilometers straight up, but most satellites are like in that 500 kilometer to, let's say, 800 kilometer range. Sorry to use kilometers. Space, you switch like back and forth weirdly. Like we talk about kilometers for the distance, even though the mass and the volume could easily be in pounds and whatever. But so it's kilometers. And we'll put the first one up, and it's going to have paying customers. So it's going to be actually the first. It'll be a small scale down payload of what we want to put up in cislunar towards the moon in L1, but it'll function completely like we will in that one. And there we're working with government customers really primarily. We're hoping to have a few enterprise guys on there just to mix it up a little bit. And then after that, we've got kind of 2 paths. We're looking at putting up a lot more satellites in low Earth orbit to provide a lot more regular access to data storage. So think about it more like the Starlink of data storage. And then we will be simultaneously building very large capable satellites that can put 30, 60 plus petabytes of data storage. And we're going to put 5 or 6 of those up towards the moon region. And to answer your question, the first step is going to be targeting with governments. So we'll be working primarily with government clients, but that doesn't mean an enterprise customer can't come on board. Banks, I think, are actually a good one for this, because there are certain things like certain passwords and encryption keys and things that actually they do want separate from their main data storage facility. So that's one option. And then we're gonna grow it. And as we grow capacity, we're gonna bring more services to a lot more entities. And it'll start with government. It'll go to enterprise, like Fortune 500 companies, and then I think mid-sized companies, and then cat photos and everything else can go with it too. So that's a little bit the roadmap, and that'll probably take let's say 1 to 5 years, because in low Earth orbit we can put many satellites up quickly. And the moon activity will start in 2028, or the cislunar L1 activity will be in 2028.
So many questions, Steve. First one, hopefully an easy one. Like, how are you deploying the satellites? Are you calling up Elon and be like, yo, Elon, it's your boy Steve. I need you to get a couple of my satellites up there?
Yep. So pretty much we launch with Falcon 9 SpaceX. There are other options. Ariane is a rocket that's built by the French, by Airbus. There's Indian rockets that a lot of people use, so that's deployable as well. We don't fly on Chinese rockets for obvious reasons, but there's a few options. There's a few other American companies, Blue Origin and Firefly, for example, that could be options, but they're still in their early, nascent launch testing phase. And then there's a company called Rocket Lab that's done quite a lot of good stuff, and they could do a few.
Nice. It's crazy that there are like options for getting your satellite into orbit now. It's unbelievable.
You used to be lucky if you could launch like once a year. Like it was so common even like 10 years ago to wait years for a launch. I mean, in 2015, we waited like 2 or 3 years for a launch. So that wasn't even that long ago. And now, I mean, there's launches happening every day, multiple times a day even.
Yeah, I saw one of those like Instagram or Facebook videos earlier this year, and it was like how frequent SpaceX has grown in the last 10 years or so, from like one missile or one rocket a year, right? And now there's like every couple of days. There was just it was an unbelievable loop.
Yeah, hundreds a year now, basically.
So, like, let's pretend, let's not pretend. You're the chief revenue officer of Lone Star. So you walk into a prospect, whether it's a government or a Fortune 500, and you say, "I can put your data in space."
Hmm.
Like, what's a common response that you get from them? Is it like cool, or no, we don't need that yet?
Yeah, no. In fact, the NATO alliance, US DoD, and a bunch of country MODs have started putting. I mean, data infrastructure, I guess is where they call it, is now part of any wargaming, any scenario-based planning, any critical asset. So it's become critical infrastructure. So that's number one. You need like a requirement where people are like, oh yeah, that's important, right? And not just blah blah blah. Like okay, that's important. So now you have our attention. Then the question is why space? And there's three reasons to that. Security, which I think we touched on. I think the sheer isolation from the Earth, bypassing most of the problems you have there. It's not to say you can't hack a satellite, but it's a lot more. There's a lot more involved. It's a lot more difficult, and there's a lot more things you can do to kind of counter that. And especially the further out you go, you can't even find it. So security is number one. Sovereignty. This is an interesting one. So sovereignty has become data sovereignty is really important, and the way they think about it is if you generate critical data in your country. So the United States has critical data. We have the missile technology. We have all sorts of crazy technology. You don't want to back that up in Mexico or even Canada, and you surely don't want to back it up in some other random country that we may or not be friendly with. And so there's now 100 countries have laws or they're passing laws that basically say, okay, for any critical data, because nobody really thought about it that much. It was like, oh yeah, it's just in the cloud. I'm backing up, it's stored. These companies are providing some level of fidelity. But for a lot of countries, and in like healthcare, like with HIPAA laws, right, that becomes regulated data. So any regulated critical data, you need to back it up in the country where it's generated, and that sounds easy, but actually, that's not how it's always been done. And there's some exceptions, in the EU where I mentioned Estonia. They actually back up their data in Luxembourg, for example, and they call those data embassies. And so we're like a data embassy because anything you put in space, like it's your, whether it's a satellite that you might be the only customer, or you're sharing it with other countries, but you're basically firewalled. You have your own like data storage sector in each, segment in the satellite. That's an extension of your sovereignty, and that's just how space law works. So that's a huge advantage to say you're Luxembourg or you're Estonia, and you're a country that gets threatened. You're Ukraine even. You're Taiwan. You may want to take your data off country, and it still counts. Within the regimes, the regulatory environment, everything else. That's still Estonian data, Taiwanese data, wherever your country is based out of. So there's an interesting compliance and regulatory reason. And then the third reason is accessibility. And accessibility is interesting because, I mean, again, we're talking resiliency operations, continuity of operations to start. What does that mean? That means there's some threat, some major threat happening on the homeland or whatnot. And then the question is logistics. How do I get there? How do I access this? Has this been bombed? Has this been, taken out? And if you can, right now it'll be fixed ground stations, but in the future there'll be nodes where you can access the data from nearly anywhere, or you may opt to have it go through like a more traditional route, like a cell tower or something. You could access it that way, and depending on the scenario, that might be fine. So space allows you to access any data, right? It's not just data storage, obviously. I mean, that's how we get our communications and geostationary orbit. And when you're getting your satellite TV and everything, that's all satellites. Your GPS, we're monitoring farms and ships and everything else you can imagine. All that comes from space. And why do we do it? Because the coverage is just so much greater, and you have access to it 24/7 basically. So those are the three reasons: security, sovereignty, and accessibility.
Nice. Thank you for that. That was super thorough. So what's been the toughest problem for you, or the toughest part of getting the company going?
That's a good question. We just did a decently large raise, which gets us our next few satellites.
A
So
or B?
so it's like a part it's like part one of an A, and we're gonna go out next year and close out this a large A round. And I would say the major challenge is it's not technical because we're really leveraging. I mean, satellite technology is very well understood. We have a proprietary payload system, but that's not a challenge to getting it to work in space. So, I mean, I just think the capital, I think the understanding that, just because I use X cloud service, that I have good enough data security, people need to wrap their mind a little bit around, like, okay, why do I need to take this extra step? And that's fair, but there's just been countless examples, and now it's come mainstream, which is great. Like, we were the first ones talking about this 4 years ago. I wasn't the original founder. My co-founder is. I came on 2 years ago, and he was talking about data centers on the moon, and everyone's like, what are you smoking? And I think, but now, I mean, everyone is talking about it behind closed doors. Everyone talks about it. So I think there was a little bit of a learning curve and an understanding of how this works. There's some complexities like with sovereignty laws, and people were trying to like figure all that out. But I can thank ChatGPT. I can because they've just accelerated the rate of data creation. Right? That's a year. That's barely more than a year, essentially. Like, I just introduced ChatGPT and Grok to my parents like beginning of the year. And I still remember thinking like, yeah, not everyone's really using this yet, right? And now it's like every company is like, how do I implement it? How do we use it best? And yeah. And it's just been a shift in a little bit, and how people are receiving the information, I think grasping it better. And yeah, combination of that. But I mean, if we don't do it, someone's going to do it. It's inevitable. I mean, if Bezos, spent over 20 years building his rocket company. That guy's not going to quit. Elon's not going to quit. I mean, literally the biggest mouthpieces of technology in the world are talking about it. And, for me, that's fantastic.
So that's my question, Stephen. You literally kind of led right into that. One, who's your competitors? Are you the only one doing this? And what's stopping Jeff Bezos at Blue Origin or Elon of saying, you know what, like, that's cute, Steve. We already have all this. We know it. We're in this field already, and they just snap their fingers and it's done.
Yeah, and that's a fair question. I think like so competitor wise, we were the first and the only one really talking about doing secure storage. Like thinking about us more like kind of like bank vault secure storage systems for backup resiliency purposes. And certainly about putting it in cislunar and L1 and that orbit I was telling you about out in the distance. And since then, there have been more and more companies. There's been maybe a small handful looking at doing data, more like data center compute, so processing. So for AI training models, processing data in space. So they're focused on the processing side of the data center. We're focused like more solely on the storage. And in fact, we're working with a few of these like who you may on first glance think are a competitor, but for us, we're actually backing up their data. So not only can we back up terrestrial data storage, which is, let's say the prime objective, we can back up in-space data that satellites generate, because most satellites don't carry a bunch of data storage because that takes up space, it's mass, takes up power, right? Those are still all big challenges. So we can back up not just one economy on the ground and also in space, and then eventually, you go to the moon. Moon will be a relay for Mars. So you could just imagine how this whole digital infrastructure really takes place. And then to answer your question on the competition of the Titans, look, we need there's basically infinity data that needs to be stored, and I'm not saying it's certainly not an easy problem to solve. And storage is just, there will always need to be more and more storage. And if we're just a big, storage entity that everyone wants to back up on, I think there's more than enough room for us and even others to come into the space and provide that service. But it's actually kind of our certainly our goal to work with these partners and to figure out a way how we bring our expertise to what, the infrastructure layers that they're already doing. I mean, almost anyone could build a satellite today, but most of us choose not to. Like, we outsource our satellite, right? Because they're specialized in that hardware, and we've got the software, and we've got our payload specifics and so forth. But that's, but in theory, I mean, we could be doing all that as well and put out, and not outsource our satellite hardware. So I think in space, you've got the basics. You have to communicate, and then you've got like the hardware function and the software function, and then everyone kind of just plays a role and figures out their niche, and then you try to get into the market fast. So our go-to-market strategy is to be really one of the first to get up there. I think we're working with amazing partners on the ground. We've announced. I believe the only data center we announced is called Kio Data Centers out of Mexico, but they're also in 5 other countries in Latin America, and but we've got big data center partners in all other countries as well. And so it's also about the network. It's also about the business relationships. It's about the secure network. It's about having the trust of these partners to let us use their facilities. Right. So I think like any business, if you're going in and there's no competition, you could think to yourself, man, that's, why is there no other competition? But in certain instances, like this one, I think there's just a lot of legwork that you have to set up. So from my perspective, I think we're ahead of the game and ahead of the curve.
So speaking of that, Steve, like, what is the go-to-market? What does your go-to-market look like? Is it you? Do you have a sales force? Who are they calling on? Like, how long is your sales cycle, right? I'm assuming it's probably a little lengthier than enterprise software or your typical, SaaS deal.
Yeah, and I think it'll evolve. But in short, we work with partners. We actually partner with the data centers who are providing the service to some of their existing customers. Our team has a sales team that works also with cloud providers and other service providers. But I think once we have the service up, kind of like Starlink, people are just going to like register, they're just going to basically go to a website and they're going to access a portal and they're going to be able to follow the steps and do all the things they need to do. So, so for a couple of years, probably we'll be doing a lot of legwork. And then after that, it'll be more of a, easy access kind of automated system, I'm assuming.
So you're doing more of a sell-through model where you're building partnerships with the data centers. They're offering an orbital DR plan to their customers. When the customer says yes, the data center would call you, set it up, offer it as a service, and then is it a subscription service like a typical data center or managed service would be?
It'll be a subscription service. It's actually comparable pricing to some of the service levels that are offered by these data centers as well, or these cloud providers. And we're not trying to rewrite anything here. I would like to emphasize one thing that you brought up about it being an orbital service. So I don't think of it as being, oh, this is like something cool because it's in space, or even, oh, this is the service in space. Do you want it because it's in space? No, we're just another data center region. Like, you could be in a remote part of the earth, you could be on a mountain, you could be in the ocean, I guess. You could do it a lot of different ways. And what's happening in the space economy is that the technology is actually normalizing, very similar to how it's growing, on Earth. And so, yes, there are differences, obviously, in how we deliver and how we store things in space. But I think fundamentally, in like a decade's time, there's going to be a very seamless infrastructure development layer between Earth and space. And there's going to be we'll be doing a lot more things in space, like maybe growing pharmaceuticals and plants. And, there's going to be a lot of interesting things we're going to be doing in space where we give the Earth a break, or we figure out how we can augment services on Earth and do it in space in a way that, benefits humanity.
Love that. One final question for you, Steve. Like, what's your biggest opportunity or risk when you're looking at the business right now?
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity is just, endless. It's endless. I mean, the opportunities are endless, literally, because data doesn't stop. It doesn't stop creating. And I will say, like, I think the opportunity is to, the cynical opportunity is to stay ahead of all the bad, because I mean, there's so many threats coming from different angles, and now you've got AI automated hacking and stuff, and so. maybe doing data storage in space is not going to be the ultimate. Well, I think it's the ultimate solution because I can't think of too much more. But at the end of the day, like we're going to be, in my opinion, like 5-10 years ahead of a lot of the bad actors. So it's about also innovating in a way that we can just stay ahead of, some of these malicious outsiders attacks or whatnot, whether it's a bad nation state or some hacking group. So that's the cynical opportunity, but the good opportunity is really it's about, I think, just providing another level of security and safety for people who just want to run their businesses, want to run their lives, don't have to think twice about, okay, you know what, even though I was hacked, I know I've got an air gapped, a backup of my whole system over here, and that's a huge relief, right? That helps us sleep at night, and that's really ultimately what I think can help. And then the challenge is going to be, it's just going to be maybe a capital scaling challenge. So what's really interesting and what we do is most of the funding is going to be, it's the capital expense for the satellite platforms and the launches and all that. But the operating costs are so much lower than regular data centers or even regular data storage, mostly because the cost of the energy is significantly cheaper. So low to minuscule operating costs, and more capex. But we're talking to there are really creative ways that we can model this, and through financing and all sorts of other stuff that once this base layer is demonstrated and proven, the rest is, I think, expansion won't be a problem.
Awesome.
So Steve, first off, thank you for sharing all that. And as we start to wrap up here, we want to be, really aware of your time. And for our listeners, if you're listening, make sure to subscribe, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, a review, depending on where you're listening or watching this. But, one thing you kind of mentioned at the beginning of the show, like, AI and really ChatGPT and a lot of this really help, excel this, kind of move this thing, creating so much data. And I don't know how much you guys are using AI within your company. I'd like to hear that, kind of, briefly. But, at our company, at Deep Blue Intelligence, we believe, our belief is that people and companies are AI enhanced, not AI replaced. So what's kind of your perspective on that philosophy when it comes to what you guys are creating, and how much AI are you guys using within internally?
Yeah, great question, and we're with you. I mean, AI enhanced for sure. It's one of these things that even if you think the worst of the technology, you have to understand it, and you have to be able to some degree. Maybe, well, you won't be able to control it, but it needs to be integrated into your workflow, and you also need to understand how everyone else is using it, and that impacts obviously competition a little bit. It impacts the user experience, from the customer side. So it's a really important point that you made there on enhancement, and I think all the smart companies are doing it. In fact, we're training. I will be going through an AI training course, one of those couple week long ones to get a certificate, as well as my co-founder and some others, for this very reason. Like I don't know what I don't know about AI. I think it's still so nascent with how we're using it. I mean, on the other hand, then you ask how we use it. Well, a real-time example. I mean, we're using the large language models. We already tested some of those for AI on our last spacecraft to bring it back to space, and they will be doing a lot of the threat detection, the real-time decision making for the spacecraft. I mean, it's not just us geeks with a joystick moving around. I mean, you're going to have real intelligence on these spacecraft that will be making real-time decisions, with piloting the spacecraft, and eventually for threat detection and for other things. So it's very real. I think that you can't put that genie back in the bottle, for sure not.
Love it. And where would be the best place for people to reach out to you? Maybe if they've got questions. I don't know. You mentioned you just kind of closed up on some funding. I don't know if maybe on some future funding, or even reaching out to sales. Where's the best place that people could contact you, or even set you up for some interviews?
Yeah. We have media at lonestarlunar.com, info at lonestarlunar.com are great places to start. I mean, for risk of getting too much, but Steve at lonestarlunar.com would be the other way to reach me directly. And we definitely welcome we welcome outside partners. We welcome interested, potentially investors, or if anyone wants to be part of our first commercial Pathfinder mission, which is going up next year, 2026. We're excited to do that. And if you guys want to come to the launch, let me know.
Heck yeah.
That would be super cool. Yeah.
Yes, VIP pass. We would love that. Absolutely. Oh man, this just made doing a 6 p.m. podcast worth it. Where
There you go. Yeah.
my wife's wondering, all right, when am I coming to dinner? So
We'll launch from the Cape. The launch window opens next October. It's usually like a 2 to 3 month window, but SpaceX has been pretty good about their timing. So we're anticipating an October 2026 launch. That'll be the first mission, the first, in revenue, data storage system in space, at least commercial. And, we're excited for that first leg. But after that, and I'm hoping we'll have big announcements this year. In fact, we will have big announcements this coming year. But more so with just what we can do, it's just incredible.
Freaking amazing. Love it.
Amazing.
Steve, this has been awesome. I'm sure we could go on for a lot longer, and what we will want to do.
Billions, we didn't get there yet.
Yes. Here's what we'll do. I'll make a promise to you, Steve. Number one, we're going to hold you to inviting us out to that launch, and then we're gonna bring you back on a show. Maybe even do it out there. That way we can continue this and really follow your journey. Because again, this was not on my radar until we had a previous guest on that talked about how far behind the United States is with securing their data, and even at the government level, which is freaking scary as all get out. So obviously this is a huge issue and needs to be addressed. And we love hearing what you're doing, and we want to follow your journey.
This was great, Steve. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you, Nick and Matt. Real pleasure being here with you guys.
Absolutely. Guys, if you enjoyed listening to this, again, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, reach out to Steve, just let him know you heard him on this show. That way we can, Steve, maybe even refer more guests to us, some awesome people that maybe Elon, maybe he's got Bezos in his back pocket, who knows? We'd love to have them on the show. But go ahead, hit that subscribe, like, and leave us a review, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.